The kettle on the stove at the Harrington Dasha was an old one, enamel cream-colored, with a chip on the spout that someone had never bothered to fix. Sarah noticed it the moment she set it on the burner. She noticed things like that. It was an occupational habit, the kind you pick up when you spend 8 years watching industrial ranges and you have nothing else to do but look. From the next room came a sound. Not a crash exactly, more like something heavy being placed down without patience. Then Marcus's voice, rising in a register Sarah recognized from a decade of marriage. High and thin, like a wire about to snap. "You have no right, this is a private event. This is my wedding night." The calm voice that answered him did not raise itself even slightly. "Mr. Harrington, I need you to sit down." Sarah found a mug on the open shelf above the range. White, no handle chip, reasonably clean. She set it on the counter. Outside the frosted kitchen window, the pine trees stood in the dark like witnesses. 2 black SUVs were parked in the snow beside the catering van, their engines off, their exhaust already gone cold. One rear door hung open. Through the glass, distorted by frost, Sarah could see a shape, a man in a dark coat sitting in the back seat with the door open, not going anywhere. Someone had asked him to sit down, and he had sat. She found the tea, a paper tag on a white string. She lowered it into the mug. A catering tray lay face down on the kitchen floor near the door. Silver, rental grade, with a scuff on one edge that caught the overhead light. Someone had walked into it or kicked it or simply not cared enough to step around it. Sarah looked at it once, long enough to take it in, and then looked away. It was not her tray to pick up, not tonight. The water in the kettle began to move. A low, interior sound, like the building thought of a boil. "Sarah?" A voice from the doorway, quiet. She turned. Derek Finch stood at the threshold in his rented tuxedo, the bow tie loosened, his face doing something complicated it hadn't done in a long time. Derek was 48 and had the face of a man who had spent that time being confident about things. He didn't look confident now. "You came," he said. It was not an accusation, it was closer to a confession. "I was invited," Sarah said. Derek looked at the mug, at the kettle, at the tray on the floor. He seemed to be assembling something in his head that kept not fitting together. "He didn't think you'd actually He stopped. "I know what he thought." Sarah's voice was level. "Is Agent Osei still in the dining room?" Derek blinked. "How do you know his name?" "Because I gave it to him." She turned back to the stove. "Go sit with the others, Derek. There's nothing for you to do in here." For a moment he didn't move. She could hear him breathing. Careful, deliberate breaths, the kind a person takes when they're deciding whether to argue. Then his dress shoes turned on the tile and he walked back through the door. The kettle clicked into a full, rolling boil. Sarah poured the water. Steam rose in a clean column toward the low kitchen ceiling, carrying with it the small, specific smell of hot water meeting dried leaves. She set the kettle down. She held the mug with both hands and felt the warmth go through her palms. Her hands were steady. They hadn't always been. But that part, the part where they shook, the part where she sat in a Red Cross blanket outside a house that was still burning and could not stop looking at her own palms as if they belonged to someone else, that part was a long time ago. That was January 2017. That was a different kitchen, a different life, a different Sarah. This Sarah had driven 3 hours from Albany in the back of a car she didn't own, with 2 licensed security escorts in the front seats and a folder of documents on her lap and Raymond Osei following, behind in the second vehicle. This Sarah had not packed for a wedding, she had packed for exactly what was happening in the next room. Through the wall she heard Marcus say, with sudden and terrible clarity, "I want a lawyer." And Agent Osei's voice, unhurried, almost gentle, "That's your right, Mr. Harrington, absolutely." Sarah took a sip of tea. It was too hot still. She waited. That was the trick she had learned. You could want something so long that by the time it arrived, you knew exactly how to wait 1 more minute for it to be ready. Outside, the pine trees held the dark and the snow fell without a sound, and somewhere in the forest, very far away, something shifted, the way a long winter finally tips, quietly, past the solstice, and the light begins, by fractions, to return. She didn't smile, she just waited. And somewhere behind her, in the place where memory lives just before the cut, the Westchester house was still burning. It started with smoke. Not the romantic kind, not fireplace smoke or autumn leaf smoke. This was the kind that coats the back of your throat and stays there for weeks. Plastic and insulation and the particular chemical sweetness of things that were never meant to burn. Sarah woke up because the smoke alarm was already done screaming. The battery had died sometime in the fall. She had meant to replace it. She grabbed her coat off the bedroom chair. Muscle memory, winter habit. Her phone was on the nightstand. Those two things, that was all there was time for. She got out through the kitchen door. The January air hit her face like a fist. She stood in the backyard in her socks, the Westchester house behind her, the second floor windows already orange, and she thought, this is not real. Then the living room window blew out and glass landed 6 feet to her left, and it became very real. She called Marcus from the driveway. He picked up on the fourth ring. Sarah, it's almost midnight. The house is on fire. A pause. Voices in the background. Restaurant noise. The clink of something glass. Are you serious? Marcus, the house is on fire. Okay. His voice shifted into the register she knew. Efficient, controlled, slightly impatient. Get to the end of the street. Call 911 if you haven't. I'm going to head out right now. It'll take me 2 hours. It took him 2 hours and 14 minutes. By then, the fire was out and Sarah was in the back of an ambulance with an oxygen mask over her face, and the Westchester house was a wet black shell that smelled like the end of something. He came through the ambulance doors, smelling faintly of wine and a good restaurant, something with butter and herbs. His tie was loosened. He looked, she would think later, like a man who had been interrupted at dinner, not a man whose house had just burned down. Hey. He took her hand. His was dry and warm. Hey, I'm here. She pulled the mask down. The bedroom wall, the east wall, I heard something in it before I woke up, a kind of buzzing. Okay, we'll tell the investigator. He squeezed her hand once, firmly. Listen, don't worry about any of it. I'll take care of everything. She put the mask back on. She was so tired. She believed him. The fire investigator's report said electrical fault. Marcus had 12 witnesses to his dinner at a midtown restaurant, a birthday party for a colleague, printed reservation, credit card receipt, 12 people who remembered him being there all evening. The report took 3 weeks. Marcus managed the insurance claim himself. He said it was easier. She was still having headaches from the smoke, still waking up in the night coughing. Let me handle it, he said. That's what I do. He moved them both into the Central Park West penthouse. His name on the lease, a temporary measure, he said, while they sorted out the settlement and figured out what to bill next. She had a drawer in the bathroom and half the closet and a view of the park that should have felt like compensation, but felt, instead, like someone else's life. By March, the lawyers were ready. She had never been to that conference room before. Midtown, 32nd floor, the kind of place with a glass table so long you couldn't see the other end clearly. She sat on one side. 3 lawyers sat on the other. She didn't know any of their names. Marcus wasn't there. His attorney, a woman in a gray blazer, slid a folder across the table. Standard settlement documentation. Miss Kowalski, take all the time you need. Sarah's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to stop it, but the paper shook anyway when she picked it up. $40,000. A non-disclosure clause regarding the property settlement. 12 pages. She read the first page and the last page and the page with the numbers. Is there anything I should know? She asked. The woman in gray smiled, a professional smile, which means a smile that means nothing. It's all standard. Sarah signed. 7 signatures, 7 initials. Her handwriting looked like someone else's. She got a check 3 days later. She deposited it. She left the penthouse with 1 suitcase and took a Greyhound bus north, and she didn't look back at the skyline because she was afraid of what her face would do. She thought, for years, that she had simply signed away the house, the settlement, the ashes of something that used to be her life. She didn't know about Clause 11, subsection B. She hadn't read that far. Her hands were shaking too hard. 7 years later, Tom Bryce would put the document on his desk and point to a single paragraph. 18 lines of legal language so dense it looked like a wall, and say very quietly, "Sarah, do you know what you gave him the rights to?" And that was when she understood that the fire wasn't the worst thing Marcus had done that January. It was only the first. The envelope was sitting against her door when she got home Sunday night. Cream-colored, thick as a birthday card, with her name written in ink that had probably cost more than her grocery budget for the week. Sarah Kowalski. The address was correct. Hand-delivered, thin, no postage stamp. She picked it up, turned it over, a gold embossed seal on the back. Harrington. She stood in the hallway in her coat and boots and opened it. Inside, a formal wedding invitation, heavy cardstock, the kind that feels almost warm in your hands. Mr. Marcus Harrington and Miss Celeste Vane. December 21st. Harrington Dasha. Pine Ridge Forest, black tie requested, and tucked behind the card, on a smaller piece of personal stationery, a handwritten note in Marcus's looping script. No hard feelings. Come celebrate. 4 words, no punctuation, after the period, like an afterthought, like a joke he didn't need to explain. Sarah read it twice. Then she set both pieces on the kitchen counter, next to the pepper grinder and a half-empty bottle of dish soap. She took off her coat. She set her alarm for 4:15 in the morning, and she went to sleep. The St. Benedict's kitchen at 5 a.m. smells like hot metal and onion broth. The ventilation fans run loud enough that you have to raise your voice over them, and the floor near the steam table is always slightly wet. Sarah liked this. She liked that there was no room in her head for anything except the work. "Yours early," said Eddie, not looking up from the cutting board. He was already dicing celery, moving fast, the knife loud and even. "Monday," she said, like that explained it. "Monday," he agreed. She pulled on her gloves and started on the carrots. 400 portions of vegetable soup. The mass of it was simple and honest, no interpretation required. She worked through the morning without thinking about the envelope, or she thought about it the way you think about a stitch in your side during a long run. You notice it, you note it, you keep moving. At 2 o'clock she took her break in the parking lot, the way she always did when she needed air. The cold came up through the soles of her kitchen shoes immediately. She took her phone out, photographed both pieces of the invitation in the grey afternoon light, and sent them to Tom Bryce. 40 seconds. His reply, "Perfect." She called him. He picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Parking lot, still in whites." She could see steam rising off her sleeve. "Talk to me." "Okay." She heard him set something down. A mug, maybe. The Dasha. Marcus uses it as a secondary records location. Physical files, paper, of any server. We've known about it for 2 years. The problem has always been access. We can't get a warrant without showing cause, and the cause we have is tied to documents we can't yet enter into evidence. So it's circular. It's been circular until today. A pause. A formal invitation, accepted and documented, gives you legal standing to be present at that property on that date. You're not trespassing. You're a guest. And a guest with standing can, under very specific conditions we've spent 18 months setting up with Agent Osei, provide the basis for the next step. Sarah looked at the bare tree at the edge of the lot. One plastic bag was caught in the upper branches, turning slowly. "He sent it to humiliate me," she said. "He did," Tom said. "He thought you'd either not come, and he'd have a laugh about it, or you'd come and fall apart, and he'd have a better laugh. He didn't think about standing." Marcus Harrington has never once in his life had to think about the legal definition of standing. She could hear Tom almost smiling. "That's the advantage of being invisible for 7 years, Sarah. Nobody watches what they say in front of the help." She let that sit for a moment. The plastic bag turned. A delivery truck backed into the loading bay behind her, beeping. "So I go," she said. "You go. You walk through that door, you stay in the room, and you do not tip him off. Not a word, not a look, not a text he could intercept." 19 days of absolutely nothing. "I've managed 7 years of nothing." 19 days, he repeated, and his voice had shifted, not soft, but careful, the way you talk to someone handing you something fragile. "But Sarah, you have to actually walk in. If you don't cross that threshold, everything resets. Everything." She tucked the phone against her shoulder and looked at the invitation photo on her screen. Marcus's handwriting. "No hard feelings." "I'll be there," she said. She hung up and stood in the cold for another minute. Then she went back inside because there were still 200 portions that needed seasoning, and the soup wouldn't wait. They got married on a Saturday in June 2009 in a small garden in Connecticut that belonged to Marcus's college friend. Sarah was 23. She wore her mother's pearl earrings and made the entire dessert table herself. Honey cake, poached pears, little almond cookies that took her 2 days. Marcus's mother said, "Marcus, she's a keeper." Marcus smiled and squeezed Sarah's hand, but didn't look at the cookies. That was the first thing she forgot. For a long time, she didn't notice. The early years were good in the way that a well-furnished room is good, comfortable, well-lit, hard to fault. Marcus had opinions about everything, and he held them with the calm authority of a man who had never been wrong in front of an audience. He'd pick the restaurant, order the wine, tell the waiter how the fish should be prepared. Sarah sometimes wanted to say, "I actually went to culinary school. I know what's in the Beurre Blanc." She never did. It seemed small, it seemed ungrateful. "You should try the duck." he'd tell guests, nodding toward whatever she'd spent the afternoon making. "She has a gift." "Thank you," Sarah would say. "Natural talent," he'd add. As if the 3 years at culinary school, the burns on her forearms, the notebook she'd filled with sauce ratios and fermentation notes, as if all of that were beside the point. She cooked for his clients on Thursday evenings. She cooked for his charity events in the fall. She cooked for his birthday, his colleagues' promotions, his mother's visits. The Westchester kitchen smelled permanently of stock and citrus and toasted spice, and guests always paused at the door and said, "It smells incredible in here." Marcus would nod. "She keeps the place running." In 2013, Sarah drafted a business plan, a small restaurant, 40 seats, seasonal menu, unpretentious. She showed Marcus the numbers on a Tuesday night. He read 3 pages, set it down, and said, "I love that you're thinking this way." 2 months later, he said the timing wasn't right. He'd found a better use for the capital, a commercial block in Midtown. He'd explain it later. He never explained it. She put the plan in a drawer and told herself, "Next year." By 2015 she had stopped saying next year, even to herself. There is a photograph from a dinner party that autumn. Marcus's colleague brought it to the table on his phone, laughing, trying to capture the room. 30 people, candlelight, the long table gleaming. If you look at the right edge of the frame, past the shoulder of a man in a dark suit, you can see the kitchen doorway. Sarah is standing there in her apron, holding a ladle, watching the room. Her face in that sliver of the photo is not angry, not sad. It is simply the face of someone watching something happen that she is not part of. Nobody mentioned it at the time. By 2016, Sarah had stopped keeping her culinary notebooks. She didn't make a decision about it. They just stopped filling up. One night she opened the most recent one and found that the last entry was from 8 months ago. A note about laminating dough, a small sketch of a tart shell, the words, "Try again with less butter." She closed it and put it back on the shelf. In November of that year, she told Marcus she wanted to go back to school, a professional program, advanced pastry, possibly bread. She'd been thinking about it for a while. Marcus put down his glass. "Let's talk about it," he said. His voice was warm, measured. The voice he used in meetings when someone brought up something inconvenient. They never talked about it. 4 weeks later, early January 2017, a night she was visiting her sister in Albany, her phone rang. It was a neighbor. The house, the one she and Marcus had shared for 8 years, was on fire. By the time she got back, the kitchen was gone. The reply card sat on her kitchen table for 2 days. It was small, cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of paper that costs more than her hourly wage. There was a gold border around the edge. The font was some kind of serif, very tasteful, very expensive. In the center, 2 checkboxes. Will attend, will not attend. Sarah filled it out on a Sunday evening, after a 12-hour shift. She'd washed her hands twice because she'd been working with beets, and her fingers were still faintly pink. She used a ballpoint pen, the cheap kind, from the jar on the counter. She pressed hard. The ink sat dark and clean in the little box next to will attend. She wrote her name on the envelope, Sarah Kowalski, not Harrington, Kowalski. She licked the envelope, walked 2 blocks to the mailbox on the corner, and dropped it in. The metal flap clattered shut behind it. She stood there for a second, hands in her coat pockets, and then she walked back home. The next morning, she called Raymond Ose. She'd met him 18 months ago through Tom Bryce, in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and printer toner. Ose was careful, soft-spoken, the kind of man who took notes in a very small handwriting and never interrupted. She'd liked that about him. "Did you send it?" he asked, before she could say anything. "This morning," she said. "Well, last night. I mailed it last night." "Good." A pause. She heard him turn a page. "The invitation gives us access to the property without a warrant. That's the piece we've been missing. You said there were records at the dacha." Derek Finch used that property address in 2 separate insurance filings, 2019 and 22, both in upstate New York. The pattern stretches back, 3 states, 6 properties over 11 years. Your house in Westchester was the second. She sat down at her kitchen table. The reply envelope was gone now, in the mailbox, in the system somewhere, moving toward Marcus. 6, she said. 6 confirmed, Ose said. Possibly more, but your connection to the Westchester property is what makes you a direct witness, not a bystander, not a file. You. He paused. "I know this isn't easy." "I'm fine," she said, because she was, mostly. "My entry point is Derek Finch's wife. She invited me. She and Celeste Vane have known each other a few years. She doesn't know anything about the case. She's not involved." He said it carefully, like he wanted Sarah to be sure of that. You arrive, you're visible, you don't say anything confrontational, you let the evening run. When I have what I need, I'll signal you. What's the signal? I'll ask you if you want coffee. She almost laughed. Almost. At a winter wedding at midnight. People ask strange things at parties, he said. That's what makes it plausible. She went back to work. The week moved in the usual way. Stock on Monday, roast chicken on Tuesday, a beef and barley soup on Wednesday that Eddie told her was the best thing he'd eaten in a month. You put something different in this, he said, leaning over the pot with his eyes half closed. What is that? A little smoked paprika, she said, and patience. He pointed at her with his ladle. That's your secret weapon. You're patient. She covered his shift on the 14th because his daughter had a fever and his wife was out of town. 16 hours, start to finish. Her feet hurt in a way that went past the usual. She ate standing up, a bowl of that same soup, cold now, in the back corridor near the loading dock. She thought about Osei's case files, 6 properties, 3 states, 11 years. She thought about the kitchen in Westchester, the one she'd spent 8 years cooking in, the one that had the window above the sink that faced the yard. She thought about Marcus's voice on the phone, the warm, measured one, saying, let's talk about it. They never talked about it. On the 15th, after a double shift, she sat in the St. Benedict's parking lot and did not move for 11 minutes. The engine was off air. The lot was lit by those tall yellow lamps that hum faintly in the cold. Her breath fogged the glass. Her hands were on the steering wheel, and they were shaking, not from the temperature, just shaking. She breathed in through her nose, counted to 4, breathed out. She did this until the shaking stopped. Then she drove home. She was asleep by 10. She slept deeply, the way she always did after long shifts, flat and dark and dreamless. In the morning, her phone rang at 7:43. She didn't recognize the number for a second. Then she did. It was Marcus's cell. His personal line, the one she'd deleted years ago and somehow still remembered. 1 ring, 2, then nothing. He didn't leave a message. She stood in her kitchen in her socks, holding the phone, looking at the missed call notification. Outside, a bus went past on Lark Street. The digital clock on the microwave read 7:44. She set the phone face down on the counter. She put the kettle on. The conference room smelled like new carpet and cold coffee. March 2017. Sarah remembered the fluorescent lights most of all. How they buzzed just slightly, just enough to notice if you sat still too long. She'd sat very still. There were 3 lawyers on Marcus's side of the table. One of them, a man with a pale blue tie and a habit of clicking his pen, slid the documents toward her without looking up. Page 4, page 11, and the last page, he said. Signature lines are flagged. Her own lawyer at the time was a woman named Croft. She'd met her twice. She charged $300 an hour, and Sarah had paid for 1 hour, which meant Croft had skimmed the documents in 40 minutes the night before and spent the rest of the time taking a phone call. It's a standard settlement, Croft told her that morning. $40,000, clean break, no counterclaims. You should take it. Sarah had $43 in her checking account. Her coat had a burn mark on the left sleeve from the fire. She took it. She signed page 4. She signed page 11. The pen clicked. What she didn't know, what nobody told her, was that page 11 contained clause 11b. Half a page of language about joint business assets, a waiver. Broad, clean, irrevocable. She didn't know that in 2014, Marcus had registered a silent partnership in Harrington Property Group in her name. A tax structure, his accountant had called it internally. A convenient arrangement. Sarah had never been told. She'd never seen a document, never received a distribution, never signed anything related to it. At the time of the divorce, that partnership interest was worth approximately $340,000. The check for $40,000 was not generosity, it was purchase price. And everybody on Marcus's side of the table knew exactly what they were buying. Tom Bryce found it in 2020. He had a small office on State Street in Albany, above a dry cleaner. The smell of chemical solvent drifted up through the floor vents in winter. He'd been practicing law for 26 years, and he had the kind of eyes that caught things other people's eyes slid past. Sit down, he said when Sarah came in. She sat. She'd come straight from a double shift. She still had the faint smell of the hospital kitchen on her chicken stock and industrial soap. Tom laid the settlement documents on the desk between them. He'd printed clause 11b in large type on a separate sheet. You waived claims to joint business assets, he said. I know. I signed. You waived them without knowing what they were. There's a difference. He tapped the separate sheet. In 2014, Marcus put you on the books of Harrington Property Group as a silent partner. He did it for tax purposes. He never told you. Sarah looked at the sheet. She read it slowly. How much? At divorce? 340,000. She didn't move. The only sound was the faint hiss of the dry cleaner's exhaust below them. That partnership, Tom continued, was never formally dissolved. It's still listed. You're still on the books. Which means what? It means you have legal standing. You can request records, financial records, property records, transaction histories. And the dacha? Tom let a pause settle. Harrington Property Group purchased the Pine Ridge property in 2019 through an LLC that traces back to the group. Sarah folded her hands on the table. She looked at them for a moment, then back at Tom. So I have a right to walk in there, she said. It wasn't quite a question. In a narrow but legally defensible sense, yes. She sat very still for a long time after that, long enough that Tom refilled his coffee cup and came back and she still hadn't moved. Then she asked, "What do I need to do?" Tom set his cup down carefully. "Learn to wait," he said. She learned to wait. And then December 21st came. The drive up from Albany took 2 hours. Sarah sat in the back of a hired car and watched the pine trees thicken on either side of the highway. The sky had gone dark before 5. By the time the dacha came into view through the trees, it looked exactly the way she had imagined it. Every window lit, white lights strung along the fence line, smoke rising from 2 chimneys, a photograph of something that had cost a great deal of money to make look effortless. Her 2 escorts, both licensed, both quiet men in dark coats, waited while she checked her bag one more time. The folder was there. Her phone was charged. She had worn low heels and a dark wool coat and nothing around her neck. The guest coordinator at the entrance was a young woman with a clipboard and a practiced smile. The smile lasted about 4 seconds after she looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry, for staff arrivals we ask that you use the site." "I'm not staff," Sarah said. She held out the invitation. Cream envelope, embossed crest, her name printed in a font that had probably cost someone a consultation fee. The coordinator checked her list, then checked it again. "Kowalski," Sarah said, and spelled it. The woman found it. She looked up. She looked at the 2 men standing a step behind Sarah. She looked back at her list. "Of course," she said. "Welcome." Inside, the main room smelled of pine resin and warm candle wax. A string quartet was playing something Sarah didn't recognize, something that was meant to sound like winter. Celeste Vane stood near the fireplace in an ivory dress that caught the light every time she moved. She was laughing at something a man in a gray suit had just said, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve. Sarah took a glass of water from a passing tray and stood near the wall. At 7:40, she heard the change in the room before she saw him. A small shift in the sound, conversations adjusting, a path opening. Marcus moved the way he always had, like the room had been arranged for him to cross it. He saw her. His face moved through something complicated in about 2 seconds. He stopped in front of her and smiled the smile she recognized from difficult negotiations. "Sarah." His voice was low, pleasant. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me," she said. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, almost. "You look tired." "I work a lot," she said. He held her gaze for 1 beat longer than was comfortable. Then he said, "Enjoy the evening," and moved away. Sarah took a sip of water. The quartet was playing something faster now. Derek Finch had been standing near the bar for most of that exchange. She had not looked at him directly. She didn't need to. She could see him in the reflection of the window glass. A big man, heavy-set, holding a drink and watching. Derek, who had sat across a conference table from Marcus in the spring of 2017. Derek, who knew exactly how an insurance claim gets structured when the building in question has burned down faster than it should have. At 8:15, he stopped watching Sarah. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. On the far side of the room, Raimondosi had just picked up a glass of sparkling water from the bar. He was wearing a charcoal suit and no badge, because he wasn't here in any official capacity yet. He was here as a guest. He looked like any other guest. He was not any other guest. Derek set his drink down on the bar very carefully, the way a person sets something down when they want their hands free. Sarah looked at the pine logs in the fireplace. One of them had split down the center and was burning from the inside out, the wood glowing orange through a long crack. She waited. At 9:30, her phone lit up in her coat pocket. She drew it out far enough to read the screen. A text from Raymond Ose, 1 letter, K. She set her water glass on the nearest surface. She buttoned her coat. Then she walked toward the study, at the back of the dacha, where the lights were on and the door was standing open. The study smelled of cedar and toner ink. Someone had left a lamp on too close to the wall, and it threw a yellow oval against the paneling like a bruise. Marcus was at the filing cabinet when she walked in. Second drawer, both hands inside it, pushing folders aside in short, rapid motions, the way someone moves when they know exactly what they're looking for and know they're already late. He heard her footsteps and turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The drawer was still open. A folder had slipped and fanned across the floor between them, papers spreading out like a hand of cards. "You need to leave," he said. Flat, no smile now, not even the performance of calm. "You invited me," Sarah said. He straightened. He was still a large man. He moved the way he always had, not quickly, but with weight, filling whatever room he entered until the room felt smaller. He stepped toward her. She did not step back. The lamp hummed very faintly. That was the only sound. "That invitation was a mistake," he said. "A clerical error. You know what it was." "I know what you meant it to be," she said. "That's different." Something shifted in his face. He looked at her coat, at her hands, at the door behind her. Calculating. "Sarah." His voice dropped into the register he used for negotiations. Reasonable, almost kind. "Whatever Tom Bryce told you, whatever you think you have, this is not the night for it. Go home." "I'm a silent partner in Harrington Property Group," she said. "I have the right to be in any property owned by this company. You can look it up." He stared at her. Then he laughed. It was a specific laugh. She had heard it exactly once before, the evening she told him she wanted to enroll in culinary school. A short sound, more exhale than amusement. The sound of a man who has already decided you are not serious. "That was a tax structure," he said. "Paperwork from 2012. It means nothing. Tom Bryce thinks it means something." The laugh was already fading. "Raymond Dosey thinks it means something," she said. It stopped entirely. Behind her, a floorboard shifted. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. "Mr. Harrington." Raymond Dosey's voice was quiet and unhurried, the voice of someone who has stood in many rooms and waited many times for the right moment to speak. "We've been looking for a good time to have this conversation." Marcus looked past her. Then he looked at the spot to her left, where Derek Finch should have been standing. Derek was not there. Sarah had watched him peel away in the hallway, moving fast toward a woman in a green dress who was already pressing one hand flat against her sternum and crying in the quiet, contained way of someone who had been afraid of exactly this for a long time. The folder Marcus had been reaching for was still in the cabinet, hanging half out of the drawer, one corner bent. He had never gotten to it. He looked at it, then at Osei's badge, then at the document in Osei's hand, folded once and held without ceremony, as though it weighed almost nothing. "I'd like to call my attorney," Marcus said. "Of course," Osei said. In the main room, the string quartet stopped mid-phrase, not at the end of a measure, in the middle of one, bow lifting from strings without warning, leaving a note unfinished in the air. Dr. Patricia Weld, sitting near the fireplace with a glass of champagne she had not touched, heard the silence and looked up. One of Sarah's security escorts led Celeste to the guest room at the end of the hall. He didn't touch her arm. He just walked slightly ahead and held the door open, and she went in because there was nothing else to do. She sat on the edge of the bed. The duvet was white, embroidered at the hem. She looked at the wall and didn't move. In the main room, Agent Osei's team worked without hurry. Two of them were at the table with laptops. One was photographing documents. The string quartet had packed their instruments into cases and sat near the entrance, still in their formal black, waiting to be told they could leave. At 10:48 p.m., Marcus Harrington was formally detained for questioning in connection with 3 fraudulent insurance claims across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The Westchester fire, January 2017, was the first one named. He was walked to a car parked at the edge of the lot. He kept looking at the Patek Philippe on his wrist, not to check the time. There was nothing useful the time could tell him. It was a habit, and habits don't stop just because everything else does. Derek Finch was taken separately, in a different car, without a word between them. By the morning of December 22, Harrington Property Group's accounts were frozen pending investigation. The Manhattan penthouse on Central Park West, listed as a company asset, was included in the freeze order. Marcus spent the night of his wedding in a federal building in Albany. No champagne, no string quartet, no view of the park. At 11:15, the Dasha kitchen smelled like hot water and pine resin drifting in under the door. Sarah filled a mug from the electric kettle on the counter and dropped in a tea bag. She didn't sit down. She stood by the window and watched the snow fall on the empty parking area outside, the caterer's tire tracks already filling in, smooth and white. She heard footsteps. Then Dr. Patricia Weld came in, still holding her champagne flute. Empty. Weld looked at her for a moment. "You work at St. Benedict's," she said. "I'm a cook there." "Yes." Weld set the glass on the counter. She looked at it briefly, as if surprised to find it in her hand. "I eat your soup every Thursday," she said. Sarah didn't answer right away. She pressed the tea bag against the side of the mug with a spoon. "The potato leek?" Sarah asked. "The potato leek." A pause. The snow outside was steady and quiet. "It's very good," Weld said. Sarah set the spoon down on the counter. The small clink of metal on stone was the loudest sound in the room. "Come see me next week," Weld said. "Not in the cafeteria." Sarah picked up a mug. She wrapped both hands around it. The ceramic was hot, almost too hot, but she held it. "I'll bring soup," she said. Outside, the pine trees were still lit. Someone had forgotten to turn off the lights strung along the path to the dacha entrance, and they glowed pale gold against the dark, against the snow, against the empty space where 50 wedding guests had stood with drinks in their hands 4 hours ago. Sarah drank her tea. In her coat pocket, the laminated photo of the burnt kitchen wall pressed against her hip through the fabric. She didn't take it out. She had looked at it enough. She knew what it said. She knew what it had cost her. And she knew, standing in someone else's kitchen, drinking ordinary tea, with a federal investigation running in the next room and a hospital board chair waiting for her answer, that the debt had finally moved in the right direction. She wasn't triumphant, she was warm, and the tea was hot, and for the first time in 7 years, she wasn't tired all the way down to the floor. That was enough. That was more than enough.